A wildfire is an untamable, uncontrolled, and unpredictable fire in an area of flammable vegetation. On the 7th of January 2025, a wildfire started in Palisades, California, and as of the day I am recording this section, it is fully contained and it has taken the lives of 12 people. We don't know the full scope of this tragedy, but what we do know is that this is not the first wildfire like this to ever happen in the world, US, or even California. Out of the 20 deadliest wildfires to be recorded in California, 12 have happened in the 21st century, while the other 8 date all the way back to 1933. This means that although we modernize, these fires just keep becoming stronger, more unpredictable, and most terrifyingly deadlier. These murderous events happen more and more often, and unless we acknowledge the why and act on it, they will continue to do so. With this video, I want to take the opportunity to explain to you why we have wildfires and what are they, what made them so unpredictable and deadly in the recent history, and give you an opinion on what I think we can do to prevent this. So now, let's get one very important thing out of the way. Wildfires are a natural phenomenon. They happen for an ecological reason and many plant and animal species depend on them. They have adapted to exploit them in many ways, like when a wildfire comes, it kills all the invading insects, which allows the trees to regrow without pests. Or the area where a wildfire hits contains trees that can survive the fire so that invasive plant species are burnt away, and the current forest can survive. Essentially, it's a natural way for the forest to be born again. It resets the environment and gets rid of anything that was technically just like a fever. We can think of this like your body raises its temperature, and so it allows it to fight off any infection, which is what this natural mechanism was supposed to do. I mean, this is what essentially would happen and does happen when these wildfires stop. When these invasive plants take over, they usually take up shade, and these natural plants, they cannot really live there, so the forest dies. The current biodiversity cannot live without the support of this immune system, which is, well, a wildfire. Well, that's the reason why they happen, but how did these organisms adapt to them? Hi there, I wanted to let you know about the sponsor of today's video, who is me, so like, comment and subscribe, but more exactly, I wanted to tell you about my own company, Mintrobe. So Mintrobe.com is a shop designed to help you find sustainable and ethical fashion pieces by giving you a great variety of options. We connect only with trusted vendors to ensure that the products on Mintrobe are held to a high standard, and to give you an example, I got myself the Ration L vegan leather sneakers. So I really like the way they looked, they are really sturdy and really universal, and the only issue I had with them is that they weren't super comfortable. They are leather, so I didn't expect them to be my everyday shoes, but after walking them in, I would definitely recommend them for any special occasions you might have, as they look really sleek and they will complement any outfit you wear. So go on mintrobe.com and check out all the other sustainable and ethical items, and let's get back to the video. Well, okay, this is the reason why these wildfires happen, but how did these organisms adapt to live in such a hostile environment? And in general, we have 5 main categories of adaptations to fire. We have resistors, and these are the species that have characteristics like a thick bark and stuff that like essentially allows them to survive the fire. Like they will survive the direct impact of the fire and just they will be okay through it. Another type are the endurers, and these are species that endure fire by resprouting from an intact root system. So when a wildfire happens and it burns away everything that was above the ground. The roots of the endures, they stay alive, and so from them, the plant can resprout and live again, even though almost all of it was killed by fire. Another one are the avoiders. These are the species that just adapted to live in conditions where a fire is not really likely to occur. They will live in like shaded areas full of cold, wet conditions, and these are just areas that are inherently resistant to burning. A fire won't occur there because of the cold and wet conditions and shaded, and yeah, that's how they live through the fire. They avoid it. Another type are the invaders, and these are the species that produce very abundant seed. And because of that, after when a fire starts and burns the tree away, a lot of that seed will survive. And with wind, when a very open area is created, because well, everything got burned away, these seeds will spread very well, and very small amount of them will actually sprout, but there's so much of it, and they also have a very rapid growth rate, so they will regrow and they will continue to live. And the final one are the evaders, and these are species that I don't really understand how they evade the fire, but they store their DNA in like a propagule. You can think of these propagules as a seed that is just very well fortified. Like a propagule could be like a cone or something that has this sprout inside, and so it will definitely survive the fire. And so even when a wildfire kills the plant, the propagule will resprout. So yeah, let me give you some cool examples of environments that depend on wildfires. Okay, so the first one is British Columbia. British Columbia's biodiversity is heavily dependent on natural wildfires. It harbors a lot of species that have adapted to an environment where this blazing catastrophe is something common and expected. The frequency of these fires, well, varies very greatly. They can be every 4 to 250 years, very much depending on the environment, but it is an environment that semi regularly, well, 250 years is a very long time, but it will happen. It's an environment that for many millennia has had those fires. Anyways, we have species in the British Columbia's forest like fireweed, which is classified as an invader. So, as you know, it produces a lot of abundant seed. Or we have lodgepole pine, which is classified as an endurer. So, these are the cones that I was describing earlier, and they will survive the fire and the tree will sprout again. The lodgepole pine is a very pretty tree, and here you have this pine trained as a bonsai by an American bonsai artist, Bjorn Bjorholm. Very cool. Another type of this kind of environment is in the southeastern United States, which used to harbor a lot of open longleaf pine forests. They had a rich understory of grasses, sedges, carnivorous plants, and orchids, which is just such a plethora of plant life. When I first read about this, it was really quite surprising to me, as carnivorous plants and orchids just seem like something very tropical. Like when I imagine them, I see a dense, wet rainforest with toucan sounds and poisonous frogs, rather than an open evergreen forest. It's just something very unique and surprising. These ecosystems have the highest fire frequency of any habitat on Earth, which is at least once per decade. In 1800s, however, we decided that fire is something bad, and American settlers prevented these natural wildfires. Without fire, other trees invaded, and their shade eliminated both the pines and that beautiful rich understory. They still, however, scarcely exist, and some of the typical plants they harbor includes yellow pitcher plants and rose begonias. And as you can see, the wildfire regime created an extremely special environment, but it was admittedly a really big chunk of southern US. So here I want to leave a question. Well, is it a good thing to remove such an environment to create a safer living space for people? I mean, you destroy such a huge biodiverse area to create a very naturally boring but a huge space for people to live in. So, well, I don't know. What do you guys think? In any case, as you can see, there are many environments in the world that depend on wildfires to keep their biodiversity. Well, world is a lot said, as I gave you two from Northern America, but there are many around the world, and since they depend on these wildfires, these have to happen. But how? How does a forest get naturally set on fire? There are many natural causes of wildfires, but only three of those are sufficiently common that we are gonna talk about them. So let's start with one, which you might not expect in this video, but actually it's very obvious. A volcano erupts, shoots out hot debris, and lava spills all over, and everything that it touches is set on fire, and so a wildfire happens. These eruptions, by the way, if you have never seen nor watched nor read anything about them, they are something so otherworldly. I mean, most of you watching this video probably lived or live in the suburbs or in apartments, so an idea that a volcano might erupt and lava will swallow your home is probably not something you ever considered, while it's a reasonable threat for many people around the world. They are relatively common about every decade or so in places like Indonesia or the Philippines. It's something so insanely devastating, but at the same time, so intriguing. And a little personal note here, I have had a small passion for volcanoes ever since I watched a movie called Fire of Love. It's just an amazing story about two people who took insane risks to understand volcanoes, captured some of the most beautiful footage ever of such a violent, unpredictable natural environment, and loved each other all the way through this journey of science. It's a very tragic but amazing story, so please watch it if you have time. It's only about 1.5 hours, and it's really worth it. Another, and to me the most fascinating reason for a wildfire is spontaneous combustion. It's just something I never knew exactly how it happens in a natural environment, and I finally researched it for this video, and yeah, it's just very interesting, and I would have never thought that that can happen, well, naturally. So, spontaneous combustion is when something starts burning because it was so hot that it reached a point called autoignition and it sets itself on fire. It's a really weird concept, so just imagine that you set an oven for 450 degrees Fahrenheit, and as some of you probably read 410 Fahrenheit, that is the autoignition of paper. So, as you put a piece of paper into that oven, as it heats up, at some point it will start burning. The interesting part of this, however, is that how do we naturally create an oven by accident? How does nature, by accident, create an oven like that? So a quick search showed me that I could try creating spontaneous combustion at home with some oily rags, but I don't have a lab and it's kind of like creating a time bomb. So yeah, I'm not gonna do that, but here's a video.
We're going to show you how it happens, tossing some linseed oil-soaked rags and newspapers into a box. In our experiment, after just an hour, the linseed-soaked rags have reached 110 degrees. 2 hours in, we spot smoke.
So what happens here is that the oily rags get oxidized, and with that reaction, it creates a lot of heat, and because they were so piled up, that heat cannot escape. So you create this natural oven, and the rags get set on fire. Okay, but this is not really a natural setting. So how does this happen in forests? For organic material like leaves, bark, dead animal stuff, whatever, to decompose, microscopic organisms like bacteria and fungi have to break it down. They digest this trash, and by doing so, they release heat as a byproduct of their metabolic processes. This heat cannot escape, so it heats up the organic matter so much that it sets itself ablaze. So yeah, Little goobers eat a big pile of garbage, they get really hot, they make the garbage really hot too, and it all sets on fire. So it's really weird, but really interesting too. The most well-known natural source of wildfires, these are very common and they occur everywhere. But how do they lead to fire? So, when a lightning strike hits, it leads to a lot of electricity to flow through whatever it strikes. Since usually what it hits is something that is not really used to conducting that much electricity, when the electrons inside of a tree or whatever bush it hits move, they create a lot of heat due to friction, and the tree sets itself on fire due to that heat. A good comparison that is maybe more understandable is to imagine pushing a block of wood on ice and then pushing it on concrete. So on ice, it's just going to slide very smoothly, while on concrete, it will either break or start burning because of that rough surface. That's the difference between running electricity through wire rather than a tree. But what makes both lightnings and spontaneous combustion, or anything for that matter, a source of a wildfire is the environment they hit. You can't just have a lightning in the middle of a desert and call it a wildfire because sand won't burn. Lightning and all the other wildfire sources need a place with a lot of fuel, which in this video I want you to understand as dry wood and any organic material that can burn. But the most important aspect of that fuel is its dryness. The way a fire works is that it needs to burn fuel. When a piece of wood is burning, it releases chemical energy in the form of heat, and that makes it warmer so it can burn more wood, which makes it even more warm, and so on. And for this chain to continue, fire needs two things: oxygen, which you can cut off with a fire extinguisher, that's how it works, that's why it works, and enough heat to burn more fuel. That's why water stops fire. It takes up that heat and doesn't release any in return, because when you heat up water, it evaporates. So when you have a dry piece of wood, it will burn well because it doesn't waste any energy on heating up water, and so it can burn faster and stronger. And yeah, you have a wildfire when you have a very dry forest. So, as you can see, these wildfires are something that nature has adapted to and relies on. Although a very destructive force, fire created these unique and beautiful environments. They rely on a regular and mild wildfire to purge the invading plant species, and so that the current biodiversity can live on and thrive. So if something is natural, works as intended, and is really predictable, it makes these wildfires natural fires. But how did the natural fires that we know turn into something truly wild and unprecedented? Something that spreads destruction on a scale that we have never seen before. As mentioned earlier, the natural process of a wildfire has been turned into something new and vastly more destructive. And as a result, we have this. This is a graph of the amount of area burned by wildfires yearly in the US since 1983. And as you can see, there's an obvious trend upwards. Adding to that, we have another graph showing the amount of wildfires yearly in the US. Together, these graphs show that although the amount of wildfires is rather constant, their destruction got much larger. The amount of area burnt in 1983 is about 10 times smaller than that in 2020. On average, every wildfire burns 10 times stronger than it used to. We will get to why later in this video, but first I want you to see the calamity that these wildfires, these new, wilder wildfires have brought. The 2018 campfire began around 6:30 on Thursday, November 8, 2018, when a part of poorly maintained transmission line of a Pacific Gas and Electric Company failed during strong winds in Feather River Canyon. Those winds rapidly drove the fire through the communities of Conco, Magalia, Butte Creek Canyon, and eventually at around 9 a.m. it reached Paradise. Just a day later, the fire burned around 28,000 hectares and soon after became the swiftest and most destructive wildfire in California's history. After the fire department contained the disaster, they had combed through every inch of the burned area, searching meticulously for lost loved ones in the ravaged community. Unfortunately, they had found that 85 people lost their lives to this blazing catastrophe that day. To fully understand this tragedy and prepare myself for this video, I watched the Fire in Paradise documentary, and I'm sorry, but I can't fully describe to you this tragedy the way that those people have. These hands-on accounts that are told in this documentary are just so visceral. They are so personal, and like just the thought that the fire started at 6:30 and by 11 it swallowed the entire paradise. Everyone was trying to leave the city, and they were first, of course, they got into their cars and they started driving away, but there was so many people trying to get away that everyone got in a gridlock. They couldn't get out. The fire was blazing through. It started just taking over the roads, and the fire department, the officers, police, whatever, whoever was there trying to take care of the disaster and just like organize it, they told the people to just run on foot. You have to run on foot to save your life. And just so yeah, I can't do it justice. Me describing it here wouldn't do it justice. I think it's because this disaster was contained to the area of the city. Each person who lived there experienced it in a very personal way, and every account is different but equally personal to them. And just yeah, because of that, I can't do it justice. Please watch the documentary. It's a great watch, and it gives you a really deep perspective on what happened that day. In any case, I can talk about the aftermath. In total, the campfire displaced more than 50,000 people, destroyed more than 18,000 structures, and caused an estimated $16.5 billion in damage. On December 6, 2019, PG&E made a $13.5 billion settlement offer to the wildfire victims, and on June 16, 2020, it pleaded guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter. And here I wanted to bring your attention to a little part of this story that isn't directly related to the wildfire, but just really is annoying and frustrating and twists my guts. So I wanted to share it with you. So on January 29th, 2019, PG&E entered bankruptcy. It filed for bankruptcy protection and cited $30 billion in liabilities for the wildfire. This means that because the fire survivors are unsecured creditors, they would be paid after the secured and priority claims. This means that shareholders and the bank would get whatever money is left in PG&E, and if anything is left after, which there wouldn't be, fire survivors would get that money, which is just so insane. I mean, this is a process which ensures that they would bankrupt, they would take all the money, the insiders of PG&E would just take all the money, and nothing would be left for the wildfire victims. And the state of California didn't allow that. They forced them out of bankruptcy with a deadline of June 30th, 2020, and they were forced to participate in an insurance fund for the wildfire victims. But still, it's just cruel, and it's disgusting and greedy. That's about it. The 2019-2020 Australian bushfire season, also known as Black Summer, was one of the most intense and catastrophic fire seasons in Australian history. Due to its uncontrollable dimension, unusual intensity, size, duration, it was considered by the media at the time a megafire, and ultimately became the largest, most destructive, and arguably deadliest wildfire of modern history. Exceptionally dry conditions, a lack of soil moisture, and early fires in central Queensland led to an early start of the bushfire season in June 2019. Hundreds of fires burned, mainly in the southeast of the country, until May 2020, which made the bushfire season, if you can even call it that at this point, last about a year. The fires burned around 24 million hectares, which is comparable to the entire landmass of UK or Oregon or Wyoming, and cost the country an estimation of 70 to 160 billion dollars, which made it the costliest natural disaster in Australian history. Most tragically, however, the fires were responsible for a lot of lost lives. Directly, the fires killed about 34 people, but this was only the beginning of the disaster. At its peak, the air quality dropped to hazardous levels in all the southern and eastern states of Australia, and smoke inhalation is responsible for around 400 deaths. Finding the fact that not only 34 people died during that time, but another 400 just due to smoke inhalation is so hard. It's I it was something that popped up after like extensive research. If you just Google the death toll of that disaster, it won't give you it will give you that smaller number. And I think it's very necessary because it adds so much complexity that is necessary to understand this disaster. An entire country got covered in smoke, and everywhere you would go, the air quality was hazardous. The ecological impact from that probably carried on to other countries north, or I think it was north, where the smoke was carried away and air quality dropped to hazardous to in probably many other places around Oceania. Many people probably due to this smoke inhalation are now at risk of cancer. It's the damage by this massive wildfire is uncountable. It is estimated that from 1 to 3 billion vertebrates died during these fires, and it's just that's such an insane number. How are you supposed to count billions, like multiple billions of lost animals? It's such a cataclysmic event. And yeah, I want you to understand that this cannot be explained in numbers. It's just such an widespread and complex event. Something so massive has such huge impact. And yeah, I think I will make a video of its own about this event because it's so complex. But I don't know. I don't know if I am able to because this requires a scientist, like a climate scientist, essentially, to explain that. But if I am able to, I will probably try to. You've probably heard about the many cases where humans were a direct cause of a wildfire, whether it's being quirky or greedy, like in the case of PG&E, or just not being aware enough. There are many ways that we create those wildfires. But as I mentioned earlier, while the number of these wildfires remains mostly constant over the last 40 years, their destruction has gotten 10 times worse. In the beginning of this video, I also mentioned that out of the 20 worst, deadliest wildfires that California ever experienced, 12 have been in the 21st century, while the other 8 date back all the way to 1933. Together, these give us a really big hint that something unnatural has happened and made these wildfires even wilder. Something that underlies all of them and makes them all so vastly destructive once they happen. There's one thing that is always mentioned in the aftermath of these disasters. the drought. In every case, we talk about the abnormally dry season, the abnormally little rain, or the abnormally hot days. The abnormal drought is always the reason for these fires. I explained to you in detail earlier how fire works because I want you to understand how important water is in stopping these fires. As you know, when there's water, there's no fire. So let's talk about how much water was there, both in California and in Australia, during the fires mentioned. In winter of 2016-2017, California experienced above-average precipitation, which ended a 6-year statewide drought. This short-lived event, however, was followed by an even more unusually hot and dry winter of 2017-2018, which was coupled with an utter lack of rain for the entire summer. Since May 1st until the 8th of November, the day of the campfire, the city of Paradise received barely 0.88 inches of rain, while usually it gets around 7. The US Drought Monitor had logged the Butte County in the abnormally dry category all the way back in June, and by the day of the campfire, the county has gone more than 200 days without receiving half an inch of rain. Although Australia does have a high rainfall variability, all the country's worst recorded droughts have happened in the 21st century. The 2019-2020 bushfire crisis was connected to an ongoing drought in the eastern Australia, which for some fire-affected areas was the worst on record. Coupled with a lack of rainfall was a record-breaking run of above-average monthly temperatures, which lasted 36 months all the way up to October of 2019. This combination of heat and drought caused the critical low fuel moisture, which allowed for these fires. So, where does this abnormal drought come from? Shortly said, it's climate change. But this is a phrase of unparalleled complexity, so let's go over it in detail. How does climate change lead to drought? To avoid any misunderstanding, UN defines climate change as the long-term changes in global temperature and weather patterns. These, well, they used to be natural, they were very slow, and since 1800s they have been very aggravated and caused almost entirely by human activity. So how do these aggravated changes in temperature and weather patterns lead to drought? The most direct connection we can make is that warmer temperatures lead to more evaporation. This reduces surface water of lakes and rivers, dries out soils and vegetation, and altogether it makes periods with low precipitation even drier than they would be in cooler conditions. Another and much more complex issue is that climate change is altering the timing of water availability. Many natural water systems, like the one in California, rely on spring snowpack melt, which has been affected. Because of earlier and faster snowmelt, water runs off easily into the oceans, and as there is just less snow in general, it doesn't have time to soak into the ground while it runs through these streams and rivers. This all leads to extremely dry soil and vegetation. Although this is a local impact on California, every natural water management system relies in a similar fashion on regular rainfall, and the worst effect of climate change is that global warming increases rainfall variability. Due to the increased greenhouse gas concentration and moisture in our atmosphere, the precipitation variability has changed and leads to either extreme drought or extreme rainfall. These extreme periods disrupt the natural processes that manage the water. During extreme drought years, they create a need for expanded water storage and faster water assimilation. During the periods of extreme rainfall, they increase the risk of flooding. Together, this means that nature cannot hold nor assimilate water once it gets it, and it doesn't have enough when it doesn't get it. Imagine that you buy a year's supply of food on the 1st of January, by February you have none left because the rest has gone bad, and you cannot buy more because you've spent all your money to buy it early. That's what happens with water because of these extreme periods. Together, the faster evaporation, the change in water timing, and the change in overall global weather patterns is what has led to this drought that allowed for these fires to be so vastly destructive. But, well, I want you to focus for a second on the final thing. The increase in weather variability is the worst one of these all because it can be connected to so many other disasters. I will be talking in my next video that I'm working on about AOSIS, the Association of Small Island States, and about the typhoon that happened in the Philippines in 2013. And this is a big part of that video. So, yeah, I just want you to understand how this destruction is not connected just to these droughts, which are already destroying so many lives and creating so much distraction. Just so much distraction. This can be connected to many other issues around the world, and yeah, it's just something that really needs to be dealt with. So summing up, this change in water's availability, the change in timing, the higher temperatures, and the overall higher variability of weather is what led to this drought. So essentially, just right before now, when I was trying to record, I was doing a little bit of research, and I saw again what led to the California wildfires and like what does lead to wildfires. And Google says right away that the reason is human. And it's so interesting because technically it's true. It is a human cause, but it's not the fact that there is a cigarette butt or a piece of trash that heated itself and set the whatever bush on fire. It's because of this human-made climate change. The drought is what led to these wildfires, and this means that we are all at fault. Every one of us is a little bit at fault here. But as throughout this entire video, I don't want you to feel, well, brought down too much, because there is a lot to do. This is the message that I want to give out into the world. So let's talk about it. What can we do now? So, as I promised you in the beginning of this video, I want to share my thoughts on the solution, but keep in mind that as this is one of the most complex problems in the world, it requires an even more complex solution. And another thing is that the attitude today might seem very grim. The Trump's administration backed out of the Paris Agreement, they're getting out of the UN, and they all but shut down the Environmental Protection Agency. I don't know what the situation exactly is right now, so cue the info. And Europe is getting out of any Green Deal, and a lot of carbon emissions come from China or Russia, where just like we can't really do anything. But I think this attitude should change, because at the end of the day, we all are consumers and we have an impact on the system, and our everyday choices do matter. But what we need to do is change this system so that it allows itself to be sustainable. I heard once that one of the most important impacts that you have on the world is through your job. I work to show you the alternatives for more ethical and sustainable clothing. And wherever you work, you have to remember to try to make your workplace a more sustainable place, providing a more sustainable product. Push those sustainable agendas wherever you work, even if you are just someone working in a company, you can get people together and push at least some kind of small agenda. A little win is better than nothing. That is so important today. I used to have this very negative attitude that I had a very big problem with recycling essentially because I'm over aware of how big of a scam it is. And a lot is said how recycling, we just have to recycle and it'll change the world, but the truth is that like it's kind of toxic and it doesn't happen anyways, and at the end of the day I think around 10% of plastics is only recycled ever. But we have to remember that 10% is better than nothing. I realized this is a win. I need to take this win and just move forward. So I want everyone to remember this attitude of one win at a time and keep on pushing it forward. But really, what is important is we need those sustainable businesses. And every business that you are a part of, try to make it sustainable. And on the other hand, you have to also support them. Even though buying an imperfect product, well, isn't the best thing you could do, that imperfect product is still better than something, well, that doesn't care about the environment at all. When the choice is to recycle or not recycle at all, I will choose that 10% choice, and you should too. Those small wins are what matters here. And on the other hand, we also have to start supporting more of these businesses. We have to show them that it is economically viable to become sustainable. Sustainability oftentimes comes at a cost, and we need to give people a motivation to make that change, because we are all a part of this system and we make it up, and our choices create this system. And so I want you to remember this attitude and share it. So you have to educate yourself and talk to your peers and respectfully try to convince them to look at their life with a little bit different lens, because at the end of the day, this is something that impacts things that everyone cares about. Everyone cares about how hard it is to live their life and how much comfort they're living, and climate change is something that impacts this more than anything else. At the end of the day, drought is something that leads to harder production of energy, to harder production of food, and these are two things that impact the prices, well, of everything. So why wouldn't people want to participate in this movement? Well, this is a hard conversation, and I know in many cases it's hard to truly go through it, but if you manage to convince just one person that didn't participate in this movement to start participating in it, that is enough. Because if everyone does so, we wouldn't have this issue. And I really believe we won't. I really believe that we will keep this attitude, and you should try to. Climate change is the most important issue that we have to deal with now, because it is the only one that affects all of us globally, and we all are a part of it. And I really believe that if we change the system, if we make it so that it allows us to live sustainably, we will deal with this. So yeah, that is the message that I want you to remember. And although this all is rather grim, the message is still positive, because we need to stay hopeful. And if you manage to explain this, what you've just heard, to just one person and convince them to make their everyday choices, their political choices, more aware, it will be fine. We will be fine. So good luck.